Is there anyone who would want to read the first couple verses of Exodus 32, 1 through 14? Let's say to verse 6. All right.
I'll read the first couple of verses.
Go ahead.
When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered around Aaron and said to him, "Come, make gods for us, who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." Aaron said to them, "Take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people took off the gold rings from their ears and brought them to Aaron. You want me to continue?
Keep going.
He took the gold from them, formed it in a mold, and cast an image of a calf. And they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a festival to the Lord." They rose early the next day, offered burnt offerings, and brought sacrifices of well-being. And the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to revel.
Thank you. All right. So this is the story. The little title for this section is called The Golden Calf. And so we joined the Israelites and Moses and Aaron as they have already been liberated from Egyptian slavery. They've gone through the Red Sea, and they are out beyond where the Egyptians can get to them now. And Moses has gone up onto Mount Sinai to commune with God and receive eventually the 10 Commandments. However, the rest of the people are waiting for Moses. Moses was up there for, according to the Bible, 40 days and 40 nights. Another one of those 40 numbers that we see, which we can take as literal, or it could just be a literary device to say a good amount of time. In any case, the first verse tells us that the people have been waiting around for Moses for a while. So what else do we notice about what's going on in these first 6 verses?
Well, in Moses' absence, Aaron is showing leadership, and he's trying to find a way to keep some peace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but he is, if I recall right, Aaron was of the priestly caste, right? I mean, that was part of his role, to be priest, and it's interesting that he's the one that comes up with the idea of melting getting the gold, and then what they end up doing with it.
Right. Yeah, so in any case, Aaron is Moses' brother, and is in some cases understood to be kind of his speaker. Some understand Moses to have had a stutter or something where he sometimes had Moses or had Aaron speak for him. So Aaron is kind of the right-hand man, the second in command, while Moses is away, he's in command.
I think the people are getting impatient, just like we're getting impatient. We want to get out. We want to sing. I had a Zoom meeting the other night with the guys in a singing group, and we're trying to figure out all kinds of ways to get together and start practicing again. And there was some reservation about distancing and wearing shields and all that. So some wanted to get together in spite of all that, and others thought, no, I don't want to do that. So
Right.
people were getting anxious. They wanted to do something. They
Right.
wanted to create a God.
I think that's
Well,
happening
especially-
anyway throughout
yeah.
society.
Especially in contrast with the Israelites, they were used to being slaves, and so they didn't get any breaks. They didn't get any chances really to just sit around. They're used to this very busy lifestyle. And so for many of us, we also have this, before the pandemic, like you're saying, this expectation almost of busyness. We want to be able to do what we want, when we want to, how we want to, and where we want to. And so to be told, well, you can't do that like exactly how you want to. And you can't do it for 7 months now. Yeah, I mean, it's understandable that people are getting restless. In this case, in the story, we don't know exactly how long the people have been waiting, but they are also restless. They want something to happen. They don't see Moses. They don't see God. All they see is Aaron. So Moses, who led them out of Egypt, God, who protected them on their way out of Egypt. They don't see these types of leadership personalities or personnel or beings. And so they want something to reassure them that they're going to be provided for. They want to channel their worries and their anxieties, and they want something to worship that's more tangible. And so we have the people saying to Aaron, the one person, or the person in charge now that Moses is up on the mountain, come make gods for us, who shall go before us. And so because we don't know where Moses is. And so the word there, come make gods, in my translation it says gods. The word in the Hebrew for that is Elohim. So that can be translated as gods, like we see in this one, or it could be God singular. And so it's kind of ambivalent whether they're trying to create other new gods or just have some representation of the God of Israel. We're not entirely sure. That most of the time we interpret it as they're just wanting to make some new gods to worship. But Elohim is that word there. And so Moses is gone. God has not appeared physically to them for 13 chapters. So, I mean, they wouldn't understand their time as chapters, but we can kind of see that time. So God appeared last in Genesis 19, 16 through 19, in thunder and lightning and that kind of stuff. And that was when they came to Sinai and saw God's presence. So this is kind of setting up the atmosphere and understanding the mindset of the people. And so going back to your point, Pat, they come to Aaron, who is supposed to be Moses's right-hand man, of a priestly caste, supposed to be looking out for the care of the people, but also supposed to have Moses's back and supposed to be close to God. And so they come to him and say, well, let's make some gods. And his response, without any protest or quotation of, let's say, Orthodox theology, is saying, okay, I'll do that. Get me your gold rings and stuff, and we'll make one. So what does he then make?
Yeah. A calf.
Yep, the golden
Golden
calf.
calf.
And so this image of the golden calf is kind of the archetype for idols from then on. I mean, we hear it all the time. If there's something that is an idol, something will say, okay, the golden calf of baseball, I don't know, the golden calf of industry, different things where it's saying, well, this is being held up and put on this pedestal, but it really isn't the thing that is going to fulfill the people. Not that industry or baseball are bad in and of themselves, but people can become obsessed with one thing or another to the detriment of other things that they actually need.
Excuse me.
A few years ago, I went to a Sided convention up in Riverside, and one of the speakers said, we have a new God in America, and it's money. People are obsessed with money and wealth, and to the point where some people worship it. I mean, they're consumed by it. Money is the end all of everything. And
well, so it's funny that you say it like that too, because we'll hear later on when we get to God's conversation with Moses, God will say something to the effect of, I will consume this people. So it's funny that you say that the false god of money consumes people as well. Yeah. And it fits in well, you mentioning money, because the calf here is literally made of gold. So something that has been currency for a long, long time, even back then. And so their desire to have some kind of connection is channeled through these gold rings, which they then reform into their own image. And the form of the calf is kind of a strange one too, because other local regional gods would have those same ones. So Egypt had a bull god, and then other ones had Baal, B-A-A-L, Baal or Baal, which was also in the form of a cow or a bull. So it's kind of interesting to see that this image of the bull comes up again, and that's what Aaron comes up with and how they do it. However, the last verse that you read there, or the last two verses that you read there, David, it says, when Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made proclamation and said, tomorrow shall be a festival to the Lord. So the Lord there, again, we could pretty easily, and perhaps not wrongly either, assume that the Lord is this new golden calf. But there's also a possibility that, well, maybe the Lord is the actual Lord, the God of Israel. That sentence is actually Aaron trying to course correct the people. Just different possibilities here.
It's interesting you mentioned the bull as being a symbol. You know, in the stock exchange, you've got the bull out there, which represents a bull market. But it's kind of like it's an image. It's an image of a bull.
Yeah.
A very large bull.
Yeah.
A very large bull.
And
Well,
everybody's looking for the bull market. You know, nobody likes the down market. Everybody wants the bull market.
Yeah. So whether it's the bull market or the derivative where it comes from, the imagery of the bull, it's an imagery that is supposed to be a metaphor for success, for fertility, for fortune, for wealth. So whether it's in that market that you're talking about, it's supposed to symbolize that, okay, things are going well. It's also a very strong image, a secure image. And so people are looking for all of these things: prosperity, fertility, strength, security, and they're placing it. So they have this desire, which is very understandable, and they are placing it in this place that is not where they have received it before. So they've received these different things, these promises from the God who was with them from the beginning. And so this is another part of the cycle where the people receive this contact and this help with God, but then once they have it, they want more, or they want something different, or they want something that is not actually good for them. And so they drift away from God. As soon as they can't have exactly what they want when they want it, they drift away. And so they tend to get themselves in trouble, as we'll see in the next couple verses. Is there somebody who would want to read verses 7 through 10?
I will.
Thank you.
The Lord said to Moses, "Go down at once. Your people whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt have acted perversely. They have been quick to turn aside from the way that I commanded them. They have cast for themselves an image of a calf, and have worshipped it and sacrificed to it, and said, 'These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt.' The Lord said to Moses, 'I have seen this people, how stiff-necked they are. Now let me alone, so that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, and of you I will make a great nation.'"
Thank you.
Like random. Is that enough?
Yep, that's perfect. So what's happening in this part?
God's getting a little upset.
To put it lightly, yeah. Yeah, so God has, while he's conversing with Moses, we can phrase it like God has also been keeping an eye on the people and seeing what they've been doing, and seeing that they have not been faithful to him, to Moses, and not faithful to God.
Can you get back and talk a little bit about gold?
Sure, go ahead.
Gold has always been a precious metal, and of course, part of the history of Alaska was the gold rush in the 1890s, and the history of California was the gold rush too. So people, if you read that history, there was a lot of claim jumping, there was a lot of murder, there was a lot of stuff that happened. Everybody was so anxious to get gold, and gold, of course, is our currency was backed by gold for a long, long time, and then they went off the gold standard, and we went on the silver standard, and so all our currency was backed by silver, the silver certificates. Remember the dollar, the silver certificates. Then they went off the silver standard, and now our money is not backed by anything except supposedly our good faith. Now, we had 2 gold mines in Juneau, they're still mining a lot of gold in Juneau. And all the gold was being sold to China. China is buying up all the gold. So here's my concern. It does, well, it has to do with this, but anyway, if the world market, if the world decides to go to the Chinese yen rather than the American dollar as the basis, and then China decides to go on the gold standard, where all currency has to be backed by gold, our dollar won't be worth the paper it's printed on.
Well, so the U.S. still has plenty of gold stored at Fort Knox and other places, but especially there.
Well, it's been sold. They allowed individuals to buy gold. Back, all the gold had to be sold to the government. You couldn't sell gold to people, to individuals. So all the gold that was mined had to go to the government. But back in, I don't know, when I think, who was ever president, they went off that. And they said, well, individuals can buy gold. So now you can buy gold. I can buy gold. In fact, I bought gold when it was $300 and some an ounce. Now it's like $2,000 an ounce. So if you bought a lot of gold back in 2005 or 2006 and sat on it, you'd have a lot of inflation right now.
Right. Well, so in any case, whether individuals have it, whether our government has it, or other governments have gold, or their own currencies, the thing of it is, what makes the dollar, the yen, the euro, or silver or gold worth anything?
Inflation.
The demand for it.
I would argue that neither of those are quite correct. They're worth what people decide they're worth. Like you said, David, the price of an ounce of gold at one point was $300 something. Now it's 200 or 2,000 something dollars. Did gold change? Did the actual mineral change? Did it get some more atoms? Did it get some more protons or electrons or anything? Did it make it more intrinsically better? No.
Oh,
The demand for gold has gone up, and so the price has gone up. The people are putting less and less faith in the paper, and so they're buying gold. That's the problem. That's the situation.
so when it comes down to by the state of California, the church is a corporation. No matter how you escape it, politics is nothing more by Webster's dictionary other than when two or more people get together and have difference of opinions. That, by definition, is politics. You can't escape it when it comes to governmental politics. We can't escape not involving in it.
Well, it's funny you say when two or more people come together with different opinions, because there's a similar phrase that would define church, where two or more people come in God's name.
They
That
come
is
together.
church.
God is there.
That is where God shows up. And so, yeah, I mean, whether it's about demand, whether it's about inflation, whether any of that stuff is involved, again, all of these things that we can physically hold, all of the value of that is above and beyond what you could just pick up off the ground is what we decide it's valued. There's some conversation about whether it has value in its usefulness, but even then, whether it's gold, silver, paper money, coins, jewels, generally, besides maybe diamonds, you can't do a lot with it. Some of the other precious jewels, you can make watches and whatever. Diamonds can cut stuff because they're super hard. But at the end of World War II, the Japanese imperial currency, they had inflated it so much that people had started making wallpaper with it, which arguably is more practically useful than exchanging it between people, because you put something on your wall. So again, what we're getting at here is that the golden calf became important because the Israelites decided that it was important. They put all of their hopes and their anxieties on this one cold statue, which didn't really do much for them except tick off the actual God that they were not able to see, and the actual God who was providing for them and giving them guidance, which they chose to ignore in their impatience. And so we read here that the Lord said to Moses, "Go down at once. Your people, whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt, have acted perversely. They have been quick to turn aside from the way that I commanded them. They have cast for themselves an image of a calf and have worshipped it and sacrificed to it and said, 'These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt.'" So essentially, they've cut God out of the picture. They've forgotten what actually happened and who actually helped them out. God goes on to say, the Lord said to Moses, "I have seen this people, how stiff-necked they are."
Do you want me to go back to it? Okay,
let
hold
me
on a
alone,
second. Hold on a minute.
so that my wrath may
I gotta
burn
move.
hot against them, and I may consume them, and of you I will make a great nation. So this is where we're getting back to that comment earlier of God saying, "I will consume them."
Okay, hold on a second. I gotta get back.
And God says that the Israelites are a, quote, stiff-necked people.
That is very descriptive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And I apologize. I apologize for my absence. I had a long distance phone call about a difficult medical situation back in Ohio. So
gotcha.
Thank you for your understanding.
No, of course. Do any of you recall a time that you've called somebody stiff-necked?
Maybe stubborn.
Stubborn, but not that term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not exactly a term we use very often, if at all.
And interestingly enough, in this Bible, in today's English version, stubborn is the word choice that is used rather than stiff-necked. But I sure like that stiff-necked description.
Well, aren't we all opinionated?
We certainly are.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are.
Well, then we're all stiff-necked.
Well, so I mean, there's I think a difference.
I think there's a difference.
I do too. I do too.
So I think you are right in that everyone generally has an opinion. However, I think there's some who have their opinions and they're able to be open-minded still. They're able to turn their neck, we could say. Let's see, it's in verse 9.
Look at both sides.
Yes, as I think it was John Keats who said that you can hold more than one point of view in your mind at a time. You know, and that's the open-minded.
Yeah, so in the Message version, it says, God said to Moses, "I look at this people. Oh, what a stubborn, hard-headed people."
Ah.
So yeah, you get that stubborn again, you get the hard-headed. And it also, with these two wordings here, it's all from the neck up.
There you go.
So perhaps
Get a stiff neck and you'll get a hard head, huh?
And it's also not talking
Want to
about
refresh
the
it?
heart. It's not talking about anything besides kind of the mind and what perhaps is right there in front of you that you can discern immediately, that you can really wrap your head around, opposed to sometimes we can think about the heart and emotions as it represents as something that's more expansive, that's more
Looks like something
open
going up
to
behind
certain
it there.
things, that connects more with things that you can't see. So you can't see, you can't hold in your hand, you can't really even influence or perceive things like love or faith,
Okay.
or
Well, very good.
trust,
Very good.
which
All
perhaps we can associate a little bit more with the heart. And so it might not be exactly what was being referred to here, but we can imagine that
So when the blue one comes up, all you have to do is delete.
the stiff neck and the hard head, maybe it's saying, well, the people of Israel are neglecting their heart, neglecting who has loved them through hard times and through good times.
Pastor, I think you're making a very good point about heart and head, because in our own experience, I mean, isn't life its most fulfilling and its most gratifying and its most peaceful when our heart and our head are in sync?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's a reason we have our head and our brain and our mind. There's a reason we have our heart and really what it represents for what we're talking about here and the emotions that we have. And oftentimes they're put up against each other. That, oh, the mind wants one thing and the heart wants another. But like you're saying, Pat, oftentimes we have the best experiences when these two things come together and we realize that they're not mutually exclusive, that the kind of more logical, intellectual part of the mind can help guide the expansive and rein in the expansive nature of our emotions and our feelings. And so, but then our feelings and emotions help to give color and warmth to our intellect and to our logic that oftentimes can be removed from the humanness of things. Yeah. And so even in verse 10, it says, God is saying, now let me alone so that my wrath may burn hot against them. So not the warmth of emotion, but all the way to hot. And I may consume them. And God says that God will then make a great nation for Moses. Well, let's go on to see what Moses...
Well, I have a question.
Go ahead.
It says, my wrath may burn hot against them, and I will consume them. Then it said, but of you. Now, who's the you? And who's the them? That's it.
So them is the people at the base of the mountain.
The ones that are being seen right there, huh?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
So they're the ones who have built the calf. But of you, the you there, so God is talking to Moses. And so saying you, I will recreate these people. So essentially, God is saying that he's going to have a similar event, that Moses will see another event like Noah and the flood. Except this time it sounds less like a cold water flood and more like a hot, wrathful, fire and brimstone type of situation that we hear all about different times. The Message version says, let me alone now, give my anger free rein to burst into flames and incinerate them. But I'll make a great nation out of you.
Okay, so they're the same people that are sort of cleansed, or they're sin then? I mean, are
Well, so
very same people?
I think we can interpret that the people who have broken faithfulness with God, so the Israelites, are going to be completely wiped out here, and that the
Fire
inference,
consumed.
yeah,
Fire
the in,
consumed everything.
mhm. The
Nothing left
inference
but
here
ash.
then is that Moses will be like the new Abraham, and actually, we'll see in the next verses that Moses then references
Talks him
Abraham. Mhm.
How then do we interpret render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's?
Say
Oh,
more.
that's all.
Pardon?
How does that relate to this particular
Yeah.
verse? Connect it for us.
Well, my interpretation of render unto Caesar that which is Caesar is respect and accept your government,
Yeah, but
unless.
this isn't the government.
See, to me, we're talking about the leaders, money,
Mhm.
ruling, difference of opinion.
I think that I would nuance what you said there and interpret it as give to the government what is the government's, or so Caesar is the stand-in for the government there. It might not necessarily be exactly flat out without anything else under it or around it. Respect the government because you should. It's more along the lines of give what is due to the government, what is due, what they already have. And there could be the interpretation there that, well, there's really nothing that they have that is not given to them by the people. That would be kind of the more American new version of it. But even back in Roman and Greek times, the notion of government as a democratic situation, I mean, it's not as democratic when the empire rolls around and Caesars roll around and there's really a dictatorship or an autocracy. But what Jesus is really saying there is that none of us have anything. What we call our own is not our own of our own merit. Everything is given to us by God, even unto our own life. So we can think then about give the martyrs of the early church, or even of before Jesus, giving their life for others. So taking what God has given them and putting a emphasis of, well, it's not even my possession, but I give it for others. So in this case, Moses, we can think about his story and how he went from being hunted and escaping the genocide of the Hebrew children, and goes into the household of Pharaoh. And so he goes from the lowest of the low, essentially, in this Egyptian society to the highest of the high. He is an Egyptian prince. And it's funny that we are talking about this a little bit because I'll be including something about it in the upcoming Sunday service. So look for that. But so he has anything he would ask for. He is the son of the ruler of the great land of Egypt. And so there's nothing that he could ever ask for that would not be given to him. And yet, he gives all of that up. He gives that life and that lifestyle up because he realizes that it's not actually worth the same it's not worth as much as the suffering and the injustice that his people, his fellow Israelites, are enduring. He may not have been raised up the same way into and ingratiated into the culture of the Israelites and the Hebrews, but he realizes that they are his people. That's where he comes from, and that they are suffering. And so he trades all of these things, and he essentially exiles himself into the desert, and he almost dies. And then he comes across these other people who have, in comparison to the Pharaoh, nothing. But as it says in one of the songs from The Prince of Egypt, the animated movie, when all you have is nothing, there's plenty to go around. And so they give him everything they have, and they show him mercy and kindness and help him to survive and help him realize that the lifestyle that he had is not worth as much as the life he has been given again. And so he steps from being a leader who at the leadership level of Egypt, that he doesn't really have to do anything, down to having nothing at all, to then being shown this kindness and lifted into and stepping into a leadership position of essentially a nation of enslaved people. So leadership with nothing to do but everything to gain, having nothing, and then moving into leadership that really has nothing and you have to do everything. But so finding the worth of things and actions and lifestyles that are actually worthwhile. The difference between monetary and intrinsic value. I don't know if that answered your question, Ray, but that's where I went with it.
Well, I've been in the classroom for 35 years, and the question is unanswerable.
In some ways.
I've heard that answered many times through the years, and much to my satisfaction. That the role of government is to provide order. We need order. And that doesn't mean that there might not be times when government takes wrong turns. And we need to, keep tabs on that sort of thing. But what we render unto Caesar, as Pastor has indicated, that's one thing. Everything is God's, and that's where our heart belongs, and our minds belong, and always seeking for enlightenment, so that we keep plugging into, okay, what is God's will for my life? What is God's will for us as the people of God? But it's good to raise these questions to sometimes somebody will have just the right insight of what you need to hear. And Pastor Barton has shared some different things that I have found useful as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you, and well said.
If everything we have is a gift of God, which I believe it is, I mean, everything's a gift. And the Bible talks about the gifts of the Spirit. And I often wonder why some people have the gifts and other people don't. For example, faith is a gift. Faith is not something we get. It's a gift. But why do some people have it and other people don't have it? And I've thought more and more about it. I think the gifts of the Holy Spirit we have to ask for. We have to ask.
Well, I would say,
for example, one of the gifts is discernment. Why do some people have discernment and other people don't have discernment?
I would
I
say
think we
that
have to ask for
perhaps-
those gifts.
I would say that perhaps we have the capability or the opportunity
Openness.
to realize those gifts. I think that we can see in Scripture that these gifts are given to us. So, for example, the greatest gift of God's grace and redemption through the freely given gift of Jesus Christ, we are all given that, whether we know it or deserve it or not.
Whether we accept it.
Mhm.
I,
Right.
I think acceptance has a little bit more to do with it too. I mean, I know people who don't want to be gentle. Well, that's not who I am. I don't want any part of that. I mean, I think that's why some people don't have it, because they don't open themselves up to the possibilities that come with each of the gifts. And we all have them in different degrees and levels. We don't all possess the same gift.
Right. Yeah. So that acceptance piece, I think, points perhaps to Martin Luther's metaphor of, and I've used this before, of the navel gazing. So
Oh,
people looking
yeah.
at your belly button and only looking out for yourself. And I think this can kind of relate to that stiff-necked concept that we hear about. They're not willing to look at anything besides themselves. They're not willing to look up and unbend their neck and open their eyes to God standing there right in front of them. And so, yes, there are these different gifts of the Spirit, and I think we have the opportunity to live into different ones of them. And I think certain people have different affinities for one gift of the Spirit or another. But all of them are given to all of us freely and equally. It's, I think, where our free will enters into it and our own personalities enter into it, which are also gifts. Which way we lean into them and accept them or not. And so that part of it, when we decide to not use those gifts for only ourselves. So appropriately, we're talking about this story where Moses is about to give the 10 commandments. And one of those commandments is, thou shalt not steal. Well, one of Luther's interpretations of that commandment is not just taking those possessions from someone, not just taking their Xbox or their vase or whatever. Another way to look at it is, if you don't use your own gifts that were given to you from God to make others' lives better, if you just hoard them for yourselves, then you are stealing from them just the same. You are taking away the opportunity for their lives to have something and improve their place in life. And so just as much as if you took their money, you're taking away something that they could use to make their life better.
Just like the gift of music, gift of singing. If it's all I did was sing in the shower and didn't share it with anybody else, it would be very selfish. If I just sang in the shower every day and didn't share with other people, the joy of singing is sharing with other people and seeing their response and seeing tears run down their face, and to see how people respond to it. That's the joy of it.
Yeah, being able to share those gifts with one another. And I think, Mars, you've talked a lot about, and other members of the choir have talked about, well, when the choir sings, it's not a performance. They're not doing it for applause. They're doing it to give to the rest of the congregation there they're sharing their gift and their passion for music as part of praise and worship and inspiration. They're taking that gift they have been given to participate in music and using it to help others and lift up their worship experience.
And to praise God.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, their worship experience of God.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So we have one little excerpt here left, verse 11 to 14, and I'll go ahead and read that for us. But Moses implored the Lord his God and said, O Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, it was with an evil intent that he brought them out to kill them in the mountains and to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce wrath, change your mind, and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, how you swore to them by your own self, saying to them, I will multiply your descendants like the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have proposed I will give to your descendants, and they shall inherit it forever. And the Lord changed his mind about the disaster that he planned to bring on his people. All right.
It's interesting to me that God is willing to change his mind, yet we're not. Most people don't want to change. They don't want to change their mind. I mean, they know what's best, and they don't want to change. Period.
I also think it's interesting that Moses stuck up for the Israelites, you know, and pleaded their case, you know, sort of an innocent till proven guilty.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so for David's point, yeah, I mean, we have a lot of very stubborn people still today, particularly in our current political season. People on either side of the aisle are so set in their one place that there's a lot of people who are not willing to hear a word from the other side of the aisle. And I think that's to the detriment of all involved. I think it's part of that stiff-necked concept. And then to Mars's point, we hear in the first line of both of these conversations, or really the sides of the conversation, we hear from God in verse 7 and then Moses in verse 11, this two-word phrase of your people. God says, go down at once, your people whom you brought out of Egypt have acted perversely. And then Moses says, oh Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people? So this is one of the times that I kind of disagree with the little comment here on the side of the verse. It says, your people whom you brought up, from verse 7. This statement puts distance between God and the Israelites by holding Moses responsible for them. It's saying in God's words that God is making it not God's people anymore.
It's kind of like parents who, you know what your son did, you know?
Right.
Oh, when he's good, he's your son. When he's bad, he's my son, kind of thing. You know, it's almost parallels that.
But yeah, and so Moses kind of says, well, they're not my people. I am of these people, but they're not, I do not possess them. I am not solely responsible for them. Kind of bringing up with God, they're your people. I am your people. If you're unhappy with them, you're unhappy with me. If you're happy with me, you have to be happy with them. It's not a pick and choose kind of game for this. or at least that's Moses' argument in this instance. And so it is one of these very interesting situations where we see God say God is going to do one thing, but then doesn't, and does another thing. God does not destroy the people. That last verse, verse 14, says, and the Lord changed his mind about the disaster that he planned to bring on his people. There's other translations that says, instead of God changed his mind, God relented, or God renounced the disaster.
Scary to think that God might plan a disaster. We don't like to think that way.
Right. It is sometimes worrisome to pick that up. But I mean, we again can think of Noah and the flood. But again, after that, God put up the rainbow as a sign of peace and a sign of covenant that God would not cause a disaster like that again. Another way to think about it is God put up his war bow, this bow of violence, put it away, put it out of reach, out of action.
Wasn't God planning to destroy Nineveh too? Because and Noah, what was it? It wasn't
Jonah.
Noah. It was
Jonah.
Jonah
Jonah.
came and there wasn't one righteous person in all of Nineveh, and so God said, unless you can find two righteous people, I will spare the city. You know.
Well, so
they're
if you remember with Jonah's story, so Jonah is sent to
Nineveh.
To Nineveh to try and tell the people there, the Ninevites, to stop being bad people. And he doesn't want to because he knows they're all bad people. He doesn't think they deserve it. And so he runs away. And of course gets swallowed by the whale and gets spit out at Nineveh and says, okay, I'll go and do what you're asking me to do, God. I don't think it's going to help, but I'll do it anyway, just to say that I did it. And so Jonah goes, tells the people, and they're like, oh, no, we do not want to be destroyed.
They do repent.
They put on the sackcloth and they change their ways. And then Jonah goes and throws a hissy fit. He goes up on the hill and says, oh, gosh, if these people are worthy of being saved, then I don't want that. I don't want to be with these people. Which is kind of a strange situation too, of seeing a prophet of God being so kind of digging in his heels against the call that God is calling him to. But yeah, so I mean, go ahead.
Jonah was kind of that way. I mean, he wouldn't go to Nineveh in the first place. He
Right.
said no through that little fit, and then finally said, okay, I'll go. And then he got mad because God said they repented, so I'm not going to do it. I think you're thinking of a different story, Dave. How many righteous in the city. That's a different one. I can't
That's a
remember
different
what
story.
Yeah, it's a different story. I can't remember. What it is. Yeah.
But
Right.
sometimes I wonder, if God is really so upset with us. But we pollute the ocean. The oceans are used as garbage dumps. We pollute the air. We pollute all these things God has given us. We're bent on destroying them, and yet you wonder, what's God thinking?
Or is
sometimes
God crying?
There's God crying, yeah, and the children crying. You wonder what we have to do to right ourselves, to make amends for all we've done. I got to say personally, I'm not proud of my generation. I'm not proud of my generation one iota for all that we've allowed to happen to the environment. uh, I can't hold my head up and say I'm proud of my generation.
Well, but you know what? The generations before that, the ones that discovered, copper and did copper mining have permanently damaged rivers. And, things that went on in the 17, 18, 1900s also. And their generations before your generation, Dave.
Oh, I know that. Yeah, look what we did to the American
Money.
Indians. Look what
back
we
to
did
money.
to money. Yeah, everything is money. The college I graduated from, every time they just want money. They want money. The alumni, they want money.
You talked
Finally,
about
for the
my
first
mailbox
time,
mail.
yeah, first time
I've got a question, Pastor.
Go ahead.
To me, the destruction of humanity does not mean destroying their chance, their coming to heaven.
Is that a question?
Is that a statement or a question?
That is both. To me, if I die of cancer, to me, or something else that's irrelevant, I'm still going to heaven.
Yes, I guess there can be the distinction between the perishing of the
Earth
body.
has its boundaries. Heaven does not.
The perishing of the body versus the destruction of the spirit. Yes, I think there is a distinction to be drawn there. But to David's point, I think that it's now to the point that God doesn't need to destroy people.
Doing it ourselves.
We do it ourselves. It's self-inflicted. But we're not at the end of the story. We're not at the end of times. We're not, the fire and brimstone has not landed in my front yard yet. And so I think that.
But getting back to Ray's point, we can do whatever we want to do. We're going to go to heaven anyway. So what difference does it make? We can kill people. We can walk down the street and shoot somebody. What difference does it make? God's going to save us. We're all going to heaven anyway. So what's the big deal? Why not just do whatever we want to do? Kill each other.
Isn't that the question?
The parable of the stewards.
Yeah, so I think in answer to that, I think that's the situation of lazy or cheap grace. It's the line of thinking of, okay, well, if we believe as Lutherans do that there's nothing that we can do to separate us from the love of God, and that there's nothing we can do to earn it or get rid of it, well, it's a free-for-all. We don't have to do anything, and we can do whatever we want. We can go and rob a bank or go and, like you're saying.
That's not what I said.
But I think at that point, you've turned back to your belly button. You're not seeing the actual good news. You're not hearing the gospel. You're not internalizing the message or the grace or the love of God, because you're not showing or sharing or seeing the grace and love of other people, because that love and grace is in those neighbors around you. They're in
God so loved the world.
And so if you come to a point
with love in our hearts.
But if you come to a point where you're doing all of that stuff, then you're no longer accepting or leaning into or acting into God's love. You've effectively turned yourself away. You've denied it. You've pushed it away from yourself. And that is the terrible piece of our own free will. We have the will and the ability to be the saint. We have the will and the ability to be the sinner. And we do both all the time to different degrees. And so what we do then, we have these free gifts. We don't have to pay gold. We don't have to pay dollars. We don't have to pay yen. We don't have to pay anything for the gift of God's salvation. It is a free gift, but it is not a cheap gift. It is not cheap grace. The cost of it is
I think
God's
that
life.
love includes responsibility. You can't have love without responsibility.
Right.
Our youngest daughter is divorced, got 2 kids. She says no man wants to marry a woman with 2 kids. They don't want that responsibility. You know, who wants responsibility today? We don't want responsibility.
Well, and so what we say then is we don't have to do anything to receive God's grace, but so we don't have to earn it in that sense. And yet, what we do is in response to it. So responsibility. We have that opportunity to respond in our own best way of reflecting those gifts, of caring for the neighbor, of lifting up the voice of the oppressed, of looking for where people have decided to exploit people for their own self-interests, and giving of ourselves to those less fortunate, looking for the places where the societal norms or the societal structures that we take for normal are tearing people apart, are prejudiced against people that look differently than us, that believe differently than us, who love differently than us. And so being able to understand that there's things a lot more worthwhile than those golden calves of money or power or fame or popularity or being of one party or another.
I think part of the problem with us in our last 50 years, we've all been talking about our rights. Everybody has rights. We've had civil rights and student rights and women's rights, and everybody's got their rights. Everybody's well aware of their rights. But very few people have been talking about their responsibility. What are their responsibility? We've got our rights. Hey, we've got our right to we've got our right to put up a petition and stand out there and get petitions to recall the governor. But we don't have any responsibility to wear a mask or anything. We got our rights. That's all we need. We need our rights.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's again that
I hear freedom more than I hear rights.
Yeah.
We got our freedom.
The invasion of my freedom to make.
Right, got our freedom. We got to defend our freedom to do what we want to do.
But
we don't have any
it's
responsibility.
like when our head and our heart are working together, perhaps it's our rights and our responsibilities when those come together and are equally emphasized. So our own personal rights and our responsibilities to others, that's when things work best. Because our rights and our freedoms or whatever, they're very important. If we do not have rights as individuals, then we can be exploited. But the point of a lot of people in their messages is that it's also the rights of everyone. It's the rights of the community. It's the rights of all people, unalienable human rights. And we each have a responsibility to uphold those rights to each other and for each other, and against those who would look to exploit those rights or deny those rights. And so we really have another instance here where essentially when Moses says, asks God, why does your wrath burn hot against your people? It's in that direct opposition to God's statement, which distances or separates or divides God from God's people. Moses is arguing that, in fact, they have been drawn together, and they are together, and they are one, and that they are inseparable. And so to hurt the people, God would just be hurting God's self. And so we can see that play out today by, if someone goes out and decides to shoot someone on the street, well, they're hurting themselves. They have, in effect, denied themselves the right or the gift of freedom and pursuit of happiness. They've denied themselves the gifts God has given them. And so that's how we can really turn and flip the script on, okay, why don't I just do whatever I want if I don't have to do anything? Well, again, going back a little bit in the conversation, there's order and then there's chaos. And in different ways, we are called and have the responsibility to have that order upheld, whether that be through neighborhood groups, whether that be through advocacy for those who are oppressed or those who have experienced injustice, and in most cases, our local and state and national and international governmental groups are set up to uphold order, opposed to having anarchy and chaos. Again, whether they uphold those responsibilities is another thing that plays out in life. But those ideals are to uphold order and to keep everyone within their rights. And so God here relents and renounces what the plan was to destroy everyone, because Moses has connected that relationship and brought the two together.
And Pastor, I don't know whether later on we will complete the rest of this chapter, but that's certain, the segment we've read today and Moses pleading the case, when he goes down from the mountain and actually sees with his own eyes what the people have done, his anger gets the best of him too.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then when you get to the end of the chapter, then there's a certain decision that God makes there that kind of completes the story as well. And I know we just look at, we may just be looking at this segment, but
Mm-hmm.
I think at the same time, it's good to know the story doesn't quite end there.
Right. Yep. So that's a very good point. It does not necessarily end on a fully rosy note. But
one other thing that occurs to me, Pastor, because I thought you made such a good point at the beginning when you were talking about the length of time that the people had been waiting for Moses to return. And I'm sure those 40 days, 40 nights, that seemed like a long time. And
Mm-hmm.
you drew a parallel with today about, who would have guessed that here we are 7 months later kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe this story maybe this Bible passage reminds us not to let our impatience cause us to, in some metaphoric way, create a golden calf.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That we need to stay focused on God. And we have many resources to do that, even though we're not physically together right now. I'm so grateful for the various services and that we have to worship online, and the get-togethers that we have by Zoom to get together to support one another in our faith and to study like this.
Mm-hmm.
But just a thought.
Yeah, perhaps the golden calf these days in this time of pandemic is that notion or that idea or that idol of normal time. People want that the time before the pandemic where we could go and sit in restaurants without masks, or travel to other countries or go on cruises, that normal time, so badly that it has become this obsession and has blocked out our view of how it can affect others.
Talk about normal time. Just got an update on that kidnapping plot to kidnap the governor of Michigan. There was a much wider plot. They not only planned to kidnap her, but several other governors who were not abiding by the Constitution. It was a militia group.
Yeah.
And they were planning to kidnap other law enforcement officers and others who are not abiding by the Constitution.
Right.
So this was
or their interpretation of it, right?
Yeah.
their interpretation of the Constitution.
The Constitution according to whom?
Yeah.
According to them, according to the militia group.
They let their interpretation of the Constitution, or their sense that they needed to have normal time again, so badly that they were willing to kidnap the governor of Michigan and others. They let that idea get in the way of realizing, well, they're also then
Breaking the law.
And infringing upon their rights, and the impact that would have on everyone. Letting this this idea become an obsession of needing to get back to the way it was before this disease became a pandemic. That obsession blocks out how, if we went back to exactly how it was before, the amount of people who would just die.
Well, the Constitution permits slavery.
Not anymore. Not anymore.
The Constitution permits slavery.
It has an amendment.
The
amendment took care of that.
The Bill of Rights and the amendments.
The Constitution permits slavery.
Not the Constitution as it stands now.
Right.
Yes.
They couldn't cover everything to begin with.
There's a distinction between Constitution and amendment. I taught American government for 30-some years. One of our Chief Justices was asked a question by various reporters. Will you support the Constitution? She said no. She answered it twice, and she said, "What, you won't accept the Constitution?" She said no. She said, "I will respect and accept the laws."
The understanding of the Constitution that we have now is that it includes the Bill of Rights and the amendments, and that the amendments are set in place to supersede and to clarify those points which were not expressly and explicitly written out. And that's the point of them. Again, we get back to this in the title, Bill of Rights. And so, yeah, I mean, there's an important distinction from when the Constitution was written as a single document, as opposed to how it has evolved with these other documents that are that were not originally part of it, but have been understood to incorporate into it and are integrally effective on what it is now.
Well, the first day of
So then the Constitution does not give women the right to vote?
The Constitution does not give them the right to vote. The amendment does.
Yeah, I think what Ray's saying is like this,
Yeah.
would be the limited.
I'll give you a different example. The first day of school in every classroom, and I always ask all of them, would you object to my calling you an egghead? And most of them raised their hands and said, absolutely not. I said, now you got a dictionary in your desk, look up the word definition of the word egghead. And after they read the definition of the word egghead, they all changed their minds.
It was a compliment.
An egghead is an intellectual.
Mm-hmm.
Very smart person.
So it's a matter of, you may agree without realizing that your disagreement is really an agreement in time.
I think, Ray, what you're teaching us is the importance that when we use a word, we need to agree on what the definition of is. So that if we're talking about Constitution as just the original document, that's a different thing than talking about with everything.
We're talking about communication. You communicate when you understand one another.
I'm going to bring this full circle and say, okay, that piece of paper that we have, whether it be the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, etc. Any of the bills that we're going to be voting on in a month or so, what's the value of those things? It's what we agree upon. That piece of paper has essentially no value. I mean, we could start a fire with it. We're not going to, obviously, but it's again that value of what we agree something is worth, opposed to what we can do with something we pick up off the ground. The practical use of an object opposed to the symbolism and the ideas that it upholds. Again, if for some reason, again, it's very well protected, no one wants to do this, but if you lit the Constitution on fire, the ideas behind it do not go away. The ideals that we hold to be self-evident, we shall say, are stored not in that piece of paper alone, but in each one of us. We uphold these rights and these truths and these ideals because they're what's right to do, and we've agreed upon that. And so just like gold, silver, currency, all of that kind of stuff, what is really worth it here is how these things can affect each one of us and our neighbors. It's how they can lift up and improve our individual and our communal and our global lives. That's the real worth. Where it becomes the idol is if you get rid of that communal and that global piece, and it only is your individual.
Some people are so upset about the prayer in schools. They say that the prayers have been taken out of our schools and we've got to restore prayer in school. Well, I say all I have to do to restore prayer in school is to give harder tests. If you give harder tests, the kids will start praying. They'll go down the bathroom and sit in a stall and pray. That's how you install prayer in schools.
Well, and to be specific with that, prayer is not outlawed in school. We have a couple teachers here with us.
Correct.
Prayer is not outlawed in school.
Right.
It's the forced or the prayer that is instituted as a institutional prayer. That is what people have objected to and changed, so it's not it is not a conflict of church and state. And that actually has played out here in Menifee, where the school board essentially was ordered to discontinue, cease and desist, having Christian prayer as part of the official agenda, because it's a conflict of church and state. They've worked around that to say that if somebody wishes to use their time in the public forum to give words of inspiration, that's fine. But the separation of the official institutional endorsement of a specific faith, again, those are our rights, the right to freedom of religion. And that freedom of having that prayer as official part of the school day or the school board agenda or that kind of thing, we as Christians, we see that as a freedom. But for our Muslim or our Jewish or our Hindu or other or non-religious siblings, they could take that as an impingement or an infringement on their freedom to not believe what we believe.
Or to believe something differently,
Exactly.
you know?
And I'm sure that you fellow teachers out there would join me in saying that many times you were praying in that classroom, even if people didn't know it.
Mm-hmm. I believe it.
I had a kid once who was acting up, and I went like this, and they said, "What's she doing?" And he said, the kid who was acting up said, "She's praying." I said, "Yes,
Well,
for patience."
I'd like
There
to
you
make
go.
a comment. I'd like to make a comment in that respect. During my teaching career in San Bernardino, I was affiliated with the UCR, and I had 10 student teachers during the years that I was there. And I told them, you do not use any subject material in the classroom that is not in your curriculum nor endorsed by the Board of Education. If you do, that's an open chance to becoming fired. So you stick to the curriculum, and that depends upon your subject matter. And if your curriculum permits you to use the library, then you can use anything and everything in that your school library, not public, but school library, because it's been endorsed as purchased by the Board of Education. I said, then you're covered. Also, through an insurance company, you carry would cost me $10 to have a civil money to have insurance. So I could not be, if I were sued, I'd be covered up for $1 million for a lawsuit. But they wouldn't go after us, they'd go after the Board of Education because they had the money, the classroom teacher did not. But that's the advice that I gave student teachers, among others. I said, I'm not here to teach you how to teach, because there's no such word as word teach. I'm here to give you an instruction on how to survive.
But nobody could prevent you, Ray, from going to the bathroom and sitting in the stall and praying. You could pray for an hour if you wanted to during your free period.
Remember what I said to the classroom.
Yeah.
Again, yeah.
Now,
So
if
it's
the
the difference
classroom is
between
behind the
individual
stool,
rights
that's a
and what
different
you
matter.
can do publicly. Right.
Yeah.
In the same way, I think, Mars, you had sent me that letter from Bishop Fink, Bishop Murray Fink, talking about what I, as a religious leader, can do politically. So I can talk to my neighbor about different political candidates and even who I support. But I cannot or risk the tax-exempt status of the church that I serve.
We're a corporation.
I cannot endorse a candidate or a political law or something like that from the pulpit as a public figure. That's how the church and state separation lies. And so that's the order that we have agreed upon and have given value to. And so, yeah, I mean, coming back to our lesson here, it's an underlying current is, again, these different relationships that are woven together, the relationship of leaders, so Moses and Aaron, to the people they are called to serve and lead, the relationship between those people and God, who came and brought them out, lifted them up, improved their place in life, even if they didn't choose to see it that way at certain points. And then the relationship that the people wanted to emphasize with a hunk of gold. So the relationship we have between people and beings versus our relationship with objects and our desires there. And at the end of our particular pericope, or our selection of text, it does end with our selection, not the whole chapter as Pat Adams pointed out, but our selection with the fact that Moses did not, or Moses made it so that God did not choose to destroy the people outright, and that God valued that relationship with Moses so much as to allow for them to have real, genuine conversation, opposed to God just having the plan, deciding what to do, and nothing can change it. So, yeah. Anything else that we have here?
I got a story. When we lived in Alaska, I had a boat, and I wanted to call it the Mighty Mo, after the Missouri, the USS Battleship Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
My wife said, no, we don't want to do that. So we ended up calling it the Moses.
Oh,
So
oh, that's good.
that was the name of our boat,
that.
Moses. The Moses.
Hopefully it did not wander the desert.
Oh,
Heard the seas.
it was a good fishing
Wandered the
boat.
seas. Very good.
Oh, that's great.
Well, let's close with some prayer. Dear Heavenly God, we thank you for all of us coming together and forming a relationship with you and with each other. We ask that you help us to blend and have our mind and hearts cooperate with each other, have ourselves and our neighbors cooperate with each other and love each other and help each other in all things that help us to have better lives. Help us to not look towards the idols that are set in front of us, but look to you and to look for our neighbor and for those things that really matter in both you and our neighbor. In all of this we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.